Welcome to the AI First Business Podcast with Tina Yazdi, where we show you how companies, teams, and leaders are turning AI hype into ROI. Amir, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. So happy to be here.
Yeah. So today we have Amir Prodensky from Strada. Strada is making I'm just going to say what you just told me, which is the insurance experience joyful in some areas. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Strada, and then we can dive into your story?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm the co-founder and CEO at Strada. As you mentioned, at Strada, we build AI agents that essentially power the front office of insurance. So if you think about, you as a person today buying car insurance, and you need to call in and get a question answered, you're probably waiting on hold. You're probably reaching somebody that doesn't know who you are and is looking up on their computer to help figure out what your policy is and what you need help with. And if you call at 5:01 p.m., you're probably getting no one. And, very, very quickly in the next couple of years across industries, that experience is going to be completely different. And we're going to be the ones leading it in insurance. So every interaction across phone, text, email, any communication channel is going to be instant. It's going to be personalized. And it's going to be super pleasant and effective. And insurance is a big industry that needs this technology.
I'm sure everyone has a personal experience that they can draw from to be nodding along already. Mm-hmm. You have an interesting journey. You worked on Bay Street, which is the Wall Street of Toronto, where we're both from. Right. You went to Wall Street and you led Revolut's US expansion in a product capacity. And you also, I think you mentioned your father has kind of a background in insurance. Can you walk us through your journey and how this stack of experiences shaped your point of view for the future of financial services, and in this case, like insurance specifically?
Yeah. It's been a wild ride. I feel like I've done 3-4 career pivots, and there's probably more to go. But yeah, that's right. I started my career in investment banking in Toronto, where I grew up, which is an amazing experience coming out of university, right? You just get thrown into some pretty high velocity work, pretty intense work with some very intelligent people. And I loved my 2 years there. But I realized after that period that, I had a big interest in technology, and the best way to explore it and go deeper is actually to be building products and working directly with customers versus being more of an advisor, which is what investment banking is. But that kind of led me to finding Revolut. And, at the time, Revolut was maybe 500 people. They were big in Europe, and they were just, standing up their US office to launch the business, across the country. And so I was lucky enough to join as, one of the first early employees in that startup within the bigger startup, which was, they just brought folks that were a lot of generalist folks, right? Consultants, bankers, biz ops people from tech, and everybody got one part of, this fintech that they owned, right? On my end, I ended up owning our savings products. So everything from what regulations do you have to follow to create a savings account in the US, to what banks should we partner with? What should the product look like? What is a 1099? And how do you automate filing those tax forms? So all of that, I got to own almost from day one. And that pattern of taking smart people and throwing them at hard problems that they get to own is something that Revolut does very, very well. And, something that I believe in a lot. Yeah.
Is there advice that you were given that before your experience at Revolut seemed like good advice to follow, that after your experience at Revolut, you threw it in the garbage?
Yeah. To be honest, when you go to university, there are often these career paths that are proven and safe. And so I fell into that trap multiple times, right? Where the first career path I thought about following was actually accounting. And I was going to go and, work really hard to go work at a big four, got an internship at KPMG, and then I was going to get my CPA and then, I don't know, take over the world. And then the next one was all right, let's go become an investment banker and get into private equity, and then ... and that ... and that ... is never figured out. And I think it took me, a decent amount of time, maybe not so long, and a few risks to figure out that you can really chart your own course, and that usually leads to more interesting work, a more fulfilling life, and you don't necessarily have to follow these paths. And so that is something that at every pivot in my career, I just kind of go back to and just reflect on the fact that that's worked out pretty well so far.
And how long were you at Revolut?
It ended up being about 2.5 years, which in Revolut years, it's like dog years, it's 10 years. They move
Yeah.
fast.
Could you you set the scene, you walked in, there was a lot you had to figure out on the fly and kind of deliver results from day one from what I know of Revolut. Revolut's culture, they're very like KPI driven. Can you give us a couple of stories where you made a bet and it was absolutely the wrong bet, or you were missing like a really critical context because you're new to this area, and how you like navigated that and what you took away from that, and also a big bet that like panned out really well?
The big bet that worked out well is maybe an easier one. So maybe we can start there.
Okay.
And then actually like a big bet that didn't work, that one comes to mind. So in terms of the big bet that did work is, so I initially helped, launch the business in the US. And
what does that mean exactly?
Yeah.
Launching
So
the business in the US?
Yeah. Like, we need to comply with US regulations and find US banking partners to be able to, create checking accounts and issue debit cards to people.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's figuring that out, the regulations, the infrastructure, the fraud piece of it is all probably 10, 20 different pieces. And that is needed to actually launch it. And then of course, the marketing and acquiring the users. So it's basically like creating a company from scratch in some ways. But where I was going with it is, I think something that we got right is, after I launched the savings product in the US, which was like, whole banking integration and building the product. I ended up taking over that product vertical globally. So there's already like, a large user base for that product in Europe and across the world. It had, hundreds of millions of dollars of deposits, millions of users using it monthly. And, not just a regular savings account, but also group savings accounts, crypto savings accounts. There was a lot of creative different products that we had. And what we realized is that we are going to want to give access to folks across every region to be able to have the ability to deposit money across countries. So the vision and the goal was like, hey, if you are somebody living in the US one day, you may want to have deposits in London, right? Because the rates are different and you get different exposure. And so what we ended up doing is we thought about launching the product global first. And so what we ended up building is both the compliance and legal approach and also the product approach for onboarding for this to be scalable across countries. And so that long story short,
user, for each individual user,
for the user and for our banking partners and for the regulators, right?
Okay, right.
And we ended up launching these products in, 20 different countries just in Europe based off of that. And so I think the lesson there is you need to actually think long-term when you're building in regulated industries, because you might need to make investments today in your product, in your process, to be able to have it pan out the way that you plan to long-term.
Right.
In terms of, what didn't work out as much, and I think, reflecting back on it, it actually speaks to the aggressive nature of Revolut is, when we launched the business in the US, we thought about like, hey, let's take what's working in Europe, and let's bring it as quickly as we can to market and learn what works, right? And so that meant aggressively launching, checking, savings, trading, business, rewards, insurance. Like Revolut is very, very multi-product, right? And what we realized is the US market's a very different market, right? It's a very credit first market. And so that led, to a longer rollout and a longer phase of growth to be able to actually scale up that business, because being aggressive is good, but sometimes you have to, take a step back and realize what the market needs.
Right. After Revolut, if I remember correctly, you joined a YC startup?
Yeah, after Revolut, I actually joined a startup that was founded by two former YC founders. They both exited their companies and then got together and started a company together. And that was a company called Percents. They're joining as the second employee, initially as like jack of all trades, because that was the first business hire, and then eventually led product for that company.
So kind of bring this home and pivoting slowly over back to Strada. How did this stack of experiences kind of shape your hot take on the future of financial services and kind of manifest ultimately into Strada?
Yeah. I mean, I was always in and around financial services, both like seeing it in a legacy context, seeing it in a startup context, and then being able to kind of define and build it forward. And, I think there's, two things or the main thing that I learned about like a financial services experience being in the modern age is when you can build software that is, built from the ground up to optimize for that purchase and service experience, you can create a pretty magical product. And so I think a lot of industries that might be human first or paper first are going to be redefined very quickly with AI and automation. And you can think about that from, when you apply for a financial product, whether it's insurance or lending, you should expect to get an answer immediately. You should expect to get the best price, and you should expect to get a tailored product to you. And then when you go and ask for help, that should be, an instant, pleasant process. And I think it'll take time to play out across industries, but that's going to be the standard. And if you don't have that level of service, you're going to go elsewhere. So just the expectations for customers, I think, are going to go way up, and industries are going to have to adopt to keep up.
What I'm seeing is founders like yourself that are AI first or using the best of technology now to ask, what is possible given the current status and what we forecast, although that's hard to do, things are going to look moving forward. And that's our starting point. How do you see that, like, kind of creating your competitive advantage? Because obviously, insurance is quite an entrenched, in some ways, kind of old school industry. It's hard to break into, and the element of trust is a tricky thing as well, right? So I'm curious, like, how you kind of are using this to your disproportionate advantage to win in this market.
Yeah, I mean, there are two different types of businesses. There's like the one that is trying to replace the incumbent, and there's one that's trying to, enable them, right? We are definitely in the bucket of enabling them. We believe that, there's fantastic insurance businesses that are doing great work for people, but they just need technology and support to do it better, right? And so when we think about what's the value that we bring in, we actually help a lot of these businesses modernize very quickly, which is a sensitive subject, right? Because people are not yet comfortable by default putting AI agents in front of their customers. And so it's been interesting to see, gradual adoption, which varies depending on who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to like a massive insurer, like, I don't know, a Geico or a Progressive, they're thinking about it very differently than like a Series A insurtech startup that's building something from the ground up.
What are some of the differences in how they're thinking about it?
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. On the most conservative end of things, where they are is they're using AI to help train and assist their employees in providing service, right? So everything from like a co-pilot that a customer support agent has, maybe, automated quality assurance and training, and that segment of products is getting a lot of adoption with larger enterprises. And then they're starting to put AI directly in front of their customers with like the lightest touch. So, you might call in and an AI will be like, "Hi, I'm a virtual assistant. How can I direct your call?" And then you tell it about your issue and it routes to the right human, right? That's like the lightest touch. The next level of that is the AI doesn't just route, but it actually answers your questions off of, a very specific set of FAQs, right? So it's still limited. It might answer like 20% of your questions and then route to a human for something else. And then the next level that you take after that is, all right, this like AI agent is actually connected to your core systems, and it can do stuff like look up, "Oh, I see that you have a claim that you filed last week. So the latest status about it is this, and that." And now it's not just answering off of FAQ, but it's got data. And then the last kind of like step of it is taking action. In insurance, you often need to ask for a proof of insurance. I don't know, if you're moving into a new apartment, then you need to show that you have renter's insurance. And so being able to then actually trigger that certificate of insurance to get sent to you instantly,
right?
It's kind of like the last step. And so
instead of saving it as a PDF in my inbox archives and like looking it up in my Superhuman, as I currently do for these things.
Or instead of like them transferring to a human collecting a bunch of information, taking like 48 hours to maybe send it to you or maybe forget, just having it instantly is kind of the ideal experience. And so there's like companies across that spectrum. Eventually, even the biggest folks will be here. And we're starting here because that's where things are going. And so it might be early for some folks, but it's, a great time for.
Awesome. And then going into the journey of how Strada came together. So you and your co-founder, Arash, started it together. If I remember correctly, you launched in the summer of 2023 as a YC batch.
That's right.
And you started as a back office automation. It was like industry agnostic. Walk us through like what was the iteration journey to get to what Strada is today, and what was your final pitch that made Strada stand out to like investors and also to clients?
We went from a horizontal product that did everything to a horizontal product that was more customer service focused around that tooling. And we still felt like, hey, we need to go deep on an industry. And I think what was happening in parallel is we were tracking how voice AI technology was evolving. And we started seeing that it was getting to a place where it was a very, very effective way to communicate to customers. And we realized that like if we can tie our workflow engine that we built under the hood with this voice interface, we can actually build a very powerful tool for these customer service teams that we were using, that we were working with. But we still had the problem of like, we were talking to, customer service teams in payroll and like SaaS and other verticals. And so the second insight was actually like reflecting a little bit on my life and actually my watching my dad, who is still a life insurance agent, watching him run his business and like just realizing how phone first, paper first that was, right? Like there's still like flashbacks from like back in the day, watching him like have a phone book and cold call off of it, right?
Yellow pages, maybe?
Yeah, the yellow pages, yeah. And then also like having clients call him in and ask the same damn question every time, right? So that he doesn't have time to, work on new business. And so that was the initial like spark of like, hey, let's go look at the insurance industry. It's obviously very large, very important, but also is going to get modernized very quickly. And so it really is quite messy in terms of like how these ideas form, right? It's just like a few different nuggets of customer service and voice AI and insurance and chasing it on and pulling on those threads to eventually find something that works.
Got it. You've built your company from the ground up and your architecture from the ground up. The mental model from the ground up is AI first, leveraging the best in-class technology that is available today. It sounds like the competitive advantage your clients have working with you that are not in a position to do that is you can transpose that competitive advantage to your clients. Walk me through what kind of conversations are you having right now? How do you pitch this like kind of new way of working and new opportunity to your clients? And if there's ever like a gap where they don't quite see it that way just yet, like how do you get them over the line?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, the pitch that we have, and then there's like the ideas that are starting to become more obvious, right? Like I think it's not a shock to realize for folks to realize that like, hey, if I get something that is instant and actually works and helps me, I'm happy to talk to an AI or happy to talk to a chatbot, right? I think the pitch that we have is like, how do you get from like where you are today to where you want to be, right? How do you kind of like walk along that path that we went on? And so for us, it's really trying to distill it down to very specific use cases where Strada fits in. And so if we're talking to, let's say, somebody selling car insurance, we have, basically 3 different products that we pitch, right? We call it, Strada Quote, Strada Retain, Strada Service, right? And then we talk about like, where are the biggest gaps, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say it's on the service side. Let's say, hey, we're getting calls after hours and, right now people are frustrated because they just hit voicemail. We've been trying to solve it, but it's too expensive to hire folks to work overnight. And, it would just change up our process too much. And so then we go in and talk about, hey, let's stand up a very lightweight V1 that will answer the phone and like answer basic questions. For the complex ones, it'll, create a request for your team to call them back the next day. And then let's start to also understand the questions that folks are calling in about, right? Because the beautiful thing about like having, an AI agent answer the phones is you have a ton of data around, what are the questions? What are the issues? How are customers reacting to things? And you can use that as a foundation of figuring out where to invest in automation next. And so for us, it's really about like, how do we get something deployed very quickly, which is, lighter touch, learn from it, and then help them, think about their strategy for building up that next level of automation.
Right. And it sounds like that creates like a virtuous loop as well for the engagement, because it's like building on each engagement you have. One thing that's come up with like other founders I've spoken to in the last 6 months, which is new, is the experience of being like an AI first founder is markedly different from like the cohorts before. I think YC is a good like example, because you have like cohorts and, you have the alumni network. So you have access to like what it was like for someone to found in like 2019, for example. How do you view that experience? Is there anything striking to you and Arash, your co-founder, about that? And is there anything that you're hyper aware of that, you're doing today that like would not have been possible maybe 5 years ago?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's a few very specific ways that, common processes within the company have changed completely. And I'm actually shocked about them. I think like the biggest change that we've seen that's been super interesting and surprising is the product development experience. How do you go from, idea to design to actually, a live product? And yeah, I've been a product manager now for, 5 years. And, that whole time, the process was you have an idea and you give it to a designer. The designer works with you to implement a prototype in Figma, right? You iterate on that. And once you're done, you give it to an engineer. The engineer looks at the pixels and ends up implementing that within the app. And that is kind of the process, right? Now the design and Figma step has been completely removed, right? And what happens now is you go from an idea to an AI first prototyping app that often either you as the product manager or the engineer uses themselves. And that goes straight into code. And I never thought we'd get to this day, but the technology has gotten so good that you can actually go from idea to app reliably in production, like very quickly. And I think the job of a designer is changing quite a bit.
Looking forward to the next 6 to 18 months, you pick the time horizon. What are you most excited about the opportunity of what you're working on at Strada?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the big thing that we're doing now is we're expanding across communication channels, right? So that we get to a place where, you have voice and text and email and chat. And so when a customer texts in one day and calls in the next day, we realize who they are and we're able to actually have memory and context to continue the conversation where we left off. I think that's a big thing we're very excited about because that's kind of like the golden goal of what we're working towards. And then the other aspect of it is like, as we deploy to more and more large insurance companies, we just have interactions with so many millions of consumers and businesses that it's just super exciting to see. And like, there's a lot of like cool moments where you're reviewing a call transcript or the customer's flagging something to you and they're like, hey, look at this interaction. Like somebody just talked to an AI and they said, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. How can I use it for my business? Those kind of moments are super rewarding. And so I think as we expand, across more customers and across more channels, we're just going to see a lot of great customer experiences in sector trading.
On that note, do you have a story of an insight that came after implementing Strada that was really surprising or groundbreaking or like a kind of a cognitive shift for the customer that you were working on it with?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that comes to mind is like when we first, go live, very often like our customers go from like, hey, we don't really know what people are asking about or why they're calling to having very concrete granular data around the reasons for calling and then how we can help. And one specific story is we were helping an insurance wholesaler who actually their job is to work with other insurance agents and help them service their clients. And what we learned is that a third of all their calls that are coming in are just status checks. It's just insurance agents calling in and saying, what's the status of this quote that I submitted? What's the status of a policy that I
A third of the calls.
A third of the calls, yeah.
That's a lot.
What's the status of a claim, right? And these are like simple things that you'd think people should have access to on a web portal,
like on a dashboard. Yeah.
Yeah, but the complexity is because when you're intermediary to 50 different insurance carriers, it's actually very hard to integrate data from all of them. And so the way that the industry solves it now is just with people sending email and people making phone calls. And that means the insurance agents have a bad experience and the insurance also have a bad experience. And so just realizing like, wow, like this.
They didn't know that.
The
scale of, they didn't know that was the scale of like that one type of call.
They had a rough idea, but they weren't able to measure it until now. And honestly, it was like maybe more of a learning and realization for us than for them, right? Because we were like, hey, the use case is simple, but if we can solve it, like we could just make that experience so much better, right? You're not trying to do anything complicated in a lot of scenarios.
No, I think that's like going back to first principles. It's, just creating seamless experiences in any situation usually is a winning thing. I have some rapid fire questions for you.
Sure.
What does AI native mean to you?
Yeah, to me, it means in the context of a product, it's a product that doesn't work unless there's AI at its core, right? And for us, it's like reimagining the customer experience with AI first, right? And so I think it's pretty obvious that, if we could get to a world where when you call in, an AI agent picks up the phone, that is something that's AI first. It just wouldn't be able to have been a possibility 5 years ago, 3 years ago.
Right. What's a favorite tool that you're using, like AI, vibe coding, vibe marketing, whatever, or favorite tool stack that maybe like people haven't necessarily heard of yet?
Yeah, so I've got a funny one for you. It's actually not a tool, it's a feature.
Okay.
ChatGPT has a feature called projects that not a lot of people use. I didn't use for a while until I found out about it, but it's just a great way to provide documents or base instructions as initial context so that when you ask a question or prompt it, you have all of this, set up already. You don't have to like do it all over again. And so we use it for everything from like writing a specific type of email to like generating a specific type of SQL query based on, the AI understanding like your database already. And it just
you can
allows
upload it as a file and give some instructions on how to think about it. I love projects.
And I used to do that every time, right? It's just like, all right, here's the previous email and how I like it to write it this way. So it's just great to have that on the menu bar.
100%. What's the dumbest thing you've built that actually worked?
So this was actually funny in the early days of building Strada. This might be a little bit technical, but basically when you're building customer service bot, you have this thing called RAG. Essentially what it does is like, it takes 100 pages, it figures out what are like the 3 most relevant ones, and then the AI uses those 3 pages to answer a question. And that is like, that way you're not actually like using all that knowledge. Because we were strapped for time, we actually didn't have time to set up the whole RAG system for this customer going live. And so one of our team members was like, let's just dump the 100 pages to this AI. Let's see how it does. And what we realized is that it was actually able to answer questions incredibly well with an insane amount of context, right? Like imagine throwing the whole encyclopedia at it and with low latency, right? So very quickly, very well. The only downside is it was super expensive. So we were paying something like $1 a minute to be able to answer these. So it was a great thing that we didn't think would work, but we just one of those things that we threw at the wall and it stuck. Until we could implement the full solution.
Do you still do things that way based on that learning?
I mean, totally. I mean, at the end of the day, you just have to, the outcome is what's important, right? And a lot of the time, like you need to be able to get creative and sometimes hacky to be able to get something, stood up. And then you can figure out about the long-term stable solution over time.
No, I think that's a lesson anyone building anything can definitely resonate with. Awesome. Amir, I know we're at time. Thank you so much for joining. It was educational for me to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening. If you've gained value from this episode, please drop us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a like on YouTube. See you for the next one.